Great. Great.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Hi Perry.
Hi.
Welcome to this evening's Human Library. Tonight, this evening, we have Perry, who will be talking about misinformation in science. And as a quick introduction here from the site, the rapid spread of misinformation has exposed critical gaps between scientific knowledge generation and its uptake by the public, policymakers, and practitioners. Knowledge translation offers structured frameworks to bridge this gap, yet these approaches are often underutilized or insufficiently adapted to contemporary information environments shaped by social media, polarization, and declining institutional trust. So without further ado, we have Perry here. Perry is a monitor at the Cégep, language monitor. She helps out with the department. And in her other real life, she's also a graduate in biology. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. So welcome, Perry.
Thank you
It's all
so much for
yours.
the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Perry, and I am the language assistant or the monitor at Cégep de Sherbrooke. And today my talk is titled Knowledge Translation and Scientific Communication in the Age of Misinformation. So why is it that evidence struggles to travel in our modern society? We often assume that if we communicate evidence clearly, it will be naturally understood and used. But in today's information environment, evidence doesn't travel in a straight line. It actually moves through a series of social, psychological, and digital filters, and each reshape how we interpret it. And online platforms mix some of our high quality produced science with misinformation, with opinions and emotionally charged narratives. And this kind of creates an environment where science is uh, where scientific evidence has to compete for attention instead of being evaluated based on its merits. And acceptance of evidence isn't just about knowledge. It also depends on trust, identity, and lived experience. So even well-designed communication can fail if it's not, if it doesn't account for the social context and the community that it is presented to. And to improve this in real world, we need communication and translation systems that reflect the complexity of how we actually encounter and process information. So just here is a gradient model of how information usually travels between science and public. So on the two sides, we have the scientific community and the general public. And we have the barrier to communication separating these two stakeholders. And this barrier is separated by communication skills on one end and scientific literacy on another end. And the goal of science communication, I don't think my anime, okay. The goal of science communication is to remove this gap and bring these two groups together and improve flow of information between the two groups. So one of the formal definitions of science communication by Burns and colleagues describes science communication as the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science: awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding. And the graph from their publication, the mountain peak represents scientific literacy, and the ladders show basically a flow of information. So either the audiences have to climb up the ladder to reach the scientific peak, or the information is kind of sent down from the scientific community to them. So it kind of shows a two-way communication. However, this view may show science as superior, and it has been criticized, which we will look at later on in the presentation. Some of the strategies of science communication are presented here. So there's four main models. We have science literacy, the contextual model, the lay expertise, and public participation. A and B listed here are more so focused towards a one-way communication. So delivery of information to the community. But C and D are a two-way communication model, are two-way communication models, which kind of focus both on information delivery, but also public engagement and dialogue. Normally, a mix of all of these are used for effective scientific communication. And the main goal of these methods is to kind of gain support for research by increasing knowledge and engaging the audiences. Now, science communication, to the best of my knowledge, does not account for implementation of policies. There is, in the clinical field, there is a 17-year gap between scientific findings to patient care and clinical action. Today, we're not going to be diving too deep into that. However, I assume that if we struggle to bring evidence to clinicians in 17 years, it's no surprise that we also struggle to bring it to the public in other industries. Today, I wanted to kind of focus on climate evidence and climate change. So I did a bit of research, and you can see that this gap between research to impact is also evident in scientific literature in the field of climate change. And the bigger this gap is, it opens more space for misinformation to and distrust to enter and create a divide between the public and the experts. And that is why knowledge translation aims to address this gap. So let's say if without knowledge translation, it takes over 10 years to bring science to implement to policy and impact. With knowledge translation, you can expect a catalyst kind of to come in and speed up this process. I don't exactly know by how much, depending on the industry, it can vary, but I think the results will be significant. So what is knowledge translation? CIHR, or the Canadian Institute of Health Research, describes knowledge translation, which I will also be referring to as KT, as an active process that includes the synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and implementation or application of knowledge to improve outcomes in different industries. And again, like I mentioned, KT looks into reducing the gap between scientific finding and policy and practice. There are several different frameworks for knowledge translation. So here I just went over one of the definitions, and here is one of the frameworks that was described by Graham and colleagues. So as you can see, the framework here has two main parts. It starts from knowledge inquiry and synthesis, to action and implementation. So KT is kind of involved in every step of the way, from synthesis of knowledge to implementation and to community involvement. Now, traditional KT frameworks usually lack a dynamic and sociological consideration, and they do not explicitly include the public as knowledge users. Most models that I looked into, like the CIHR KT model, the KTA framework, or the Ottawa model, define users as clinicians, policymakers, and decision makers, leaving the public outside of the KT process. Although the CIHR model was updated a few years ago to include more sociological aspect. And we also know that misinformation appeals to emotions, personal belief, and is amplified by social media algorithms and cultural wars. And as a result, the failure of KT frameworks to involve public actively and include public in their frameworks can create kind of a gap where, again, misinformation can come in and kind of deter us from making progress in different fields. So how do we do that? So science is uncertain. How can we connect with the public and communicate better? So scientists and experts believe that communicating uncertainty sometimes can undermine public trust further, and they tend to be more careful when sharing information. And on top of that, media outlets sometimes omit uncertain information from articles when it comes to scientific journalism. And the goal is just to improve readability so it's understandable. However, this kind of contributes to the already distrust in institutions that is already that has been on the rise. And the reality is that some researchers suggested that presenting uncertain research, although is confusing to the public, it doesn't necessarily change their perspective on public trust and scientific credibility. So it might just be better to be transparent and honest when it comes to communicating science. One of the biggest lessons from research on human cognition is that people don't change their minds just based on facts and information alone. And to be able to communicate science better, we do need to understand human decision making. Information doesn't necessarily enter a neutral space. When we get presented some information, it gets interpreted through each person's values and identity and lived experiences. And we also know that social influence plays a huge role. So we take information cues from family or groups that we're involved in, including identity groups, political groups, and online networks. And these decisions are often shaped, are the decisions that we make are often shaped more by our social norms and our sense of belonging rather than by individual reasoning. And so effective communication isn't just about presenting facts, it's about strategic, targeted communication that can connect with people. And when messages connect with their people's values, they can resonate emotionally, and that they can improve trust between institutions and the public. So what is needed to make that happen? First, we need to promote scientific literacy, of course. science communication is still useful, but it is not just for teaching facts, but it is about building critical thinking skills and civic education. People also need the tools to evaluate the information that they're presented, recognize misinformation on their own, and make informed decisions. Secondly, we need to use knowledge brokers and public and intellectuals more strategically. These are the people who sit between researchers, media, and the public. It can include influencers or scientific journalists. They help us translate complex findings into accessible, trustworthy messages, and they can respond quickly when misinformation starts to spread. And then lastly, we have to establish a foundation of shared values. If we don't have an agreement on certain facts like truth, democracy, or importance of evidence-based decision-making, even the best communication won't be heard. And so effective communication, just to function today, it needs to integrate different things like behavioral sciences and understanding human decision making, as we just mentioned. It needs to have a narrative design where it connects abstract scientific facts with public experience and values so that people can understand, remember, and act on the information that they're presented better. KT also requires digital communication strategy. So information now spreads through algorithm, influencers, and rapid content cycles, and we need to also be present in those spaces. Trust building is another big factor in communicate and community engagement. So like the evidence that I presented earlier, being transparent and having ongoing communication is very important to kind of help build trust between institutions and community. We also need to have rapid response communication models because misinformation moves quickly and evidence must also move quickly. And then lastly, we need to involve the public directly and actively. And integrative KT models aim to address that and involve public. So their central premises is to involve knowledge users or the public basically as equal partners rather than like we saw earlier in the science communication model as like below the ladder. And they will be working alongside researchers and lead to research that is relevant and useful to them. Collaborating with community from initiation of research to implementation of policies is very important because it helps people care more. And integrative KT's goal is to increase the uptake of findings and improve the likelihood that research will have an impact and is relevant to users. So now enough about the information. I wanted to kind of move into the case study that we have and how integrative KT can be included in the climate change discussion and how it's maybe already been implemented to some extent, which I will share some examples of. So we know currently that there's a climate epidemic on social media. Although there's evidence that climate change is happening, and about 97% of the climate scientists agree on this matter, the public support of climate change and climate science is still mixed, and misinformation and disinformation are produced and spread rapidly on the online platforms. So misinformation refers to the type of wrongful information that is shared without having a malicious intent, and disinformation is one with malicious intent. So on Twitter alone, you can just see some of the top Twitter posts that were shared about climate change, regarding climate change misinformation. So this information was tracked between 2007 to 2022. So you can see that this has been an ongoing issue for the past 2 decades almost. So there's 4 types of climate misinformation that is usually shared online. First is denying the climate denial, or denying the existence of climate change, or downplaying its severity. Second, we have climate delay, which is having posts that delay action by saying measures are, for example, too costly, or they're too uncertain, or have potential consequences that are worse than climate change itself. So one example of it is saying that shift from fossil fuels industries can lead to job losses and economic harm. Then we have greenwashing, which is a form of climate misinformation in which companies try to show their environmental benefits or initiatives that they made to maintain their market position. And this is bad because it delays actual meaningful progress that we could be making. And then we have conspiracy narratives, which attempt to delegitimize climate science policies and activists by suggesting that they're part of a hidden agenda, which again increase distrust among the public. And again, despite the rising evidence on climate change, still 15% of Americans don't believe that climate change is happening. 10% of Canadians also think the same. And about 40% do not believe that climate change is caused by anthropogenic or human or a result of human activity. And this, unfortunately, despite the rising evidence, public belief is actually on the decline. So you can see in this graph that this is from Canada. You can see that between 2020 and 2025, the proportion of people who believe that climate change is caused by human activity has declined. And some of the driving factors of disinformation and misinformation is listed here. So you can see one is gaining revenue, influence, or support by exploiting the attention of economy. So sometimes people are motivated by the income that they will receive by posting viral content, and unfortunately, the algorithms reward controversial and viral topics. So that can be a driving factor or driving motivator. Another one is some try to protect their fossil fuel interests, and they try to maintain their business as usual scenario. And unfortunately, this may be a cause for some of the senates in the US. So here we have an article listing how much some of the senators have gained from fossil fuel industries, which you can see is over millions of dollars. Yet some of them have stated well, lack of have stated support against climate actions. Driving factors can also just be without malicious motivations. So it can be caused by misunderstanding, misinterpretations of data, or having outdated knowledge, or it can be because of that sense of group belonging and the political identity that people have. So climate change could actually be considered a failure of KT efforts in science communication. So why is that? The traditional frameworks fail because they assume that people will engage with evidence rationally. And so if they're presented facts, they'll be able to understand and use it. They also assume there's stable institutional trust, and that may have been reasonable maybe a long time ago, but institutional trust is uneven, and in many cases it is declining. And classical KT also doesn't account for emotional and political filters people use to interpret information. Again, evidence is received through personal experience, views and values, and social identity. And then lastly, traditional KT frameworks don't meaningfully include communities or the public as knowledge users. And all of this means that we need updated models, approaches that are rational, participatory, and responsive. And integrative knowledge translation can be a good point to start. So there has already been some efforts, and there has been continued efforts to integrate knowledge translation into communities and involve the communities. So one of them is involving in Indigenous communities and combining Indigenous knowledge with Western research. So studying Indigenous practices as foundations to combat climate change can be helpful because Indigenous communities have lived for so long on the land, and they're usually among the first to notice climate shifts. They also have great knowledge that can enrich our policies and actions. One of the examples is they have sustainable farming practices, like in South Mexico or in West Africa. So here we have a picture of the milpa, which is an indigenous way of sustainable farming, where they maintain biodiversity and they prevent deforestation. So you can see their crops are kind of placed near trees. And this is just an example. Due to time, I won't be getting into it too much, but there has been studies that in support of involving indigenous communities in climate action plans. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that companies play a big role in our current climate. So another a good way to kind of address climate change problems is through involving companies and keeping them accountable. So some of the barriers that you might face is for engaging companies is lack of context-specific sustainability solutions. Another one is they may have low trust in academic advice. They may be pressured to reduce costs. There might be some communication gaps, and they might have difficulty implementing climate action into their company. And integrative KT addresses these barriers by helping researchers to co-design tailored intervention with companies. They also create partnership-based approach to building credibility and trust between academic partners and companies. They also emphasize practical and industry-led solutions to address the cost effectiveness and the cost barrier. And then they also address the communication gap by allowing knowledge to be co-created rather than just delivered. So two of the initiatives that have been implemented into businesses are industrial energy manager programs, which involves universities and researchers to partner with manufacturing firms, and the circular economy innovation labs, which engages researchers, again, municipalities and industries. And both of these initiatives in the long run help to save these businesses some costs. So with the industrial energy managers programs, the projected savings are 5 to 30% of the energy costs. So you can see that these are kind of investments that will have returns in long term. And Canada is involved in some of these as well. So just in summary, I went over the last couple of slides quickly, but just in summary, facts don't travel alone. The facts don't, make people move alone. And originally, knowledge translation frameworks weren't built for the weren't built with having public in mind, although they were meant to serve the public. And then trust, values, and relationships shape our decision making. However, with integrative knowledge translation, Indigenous knowledge, and community involvement, that's how we can make sure that there's community partnership between scientists, clinicians, and the public, and make sure that evidence travel. And then for some future perspective, we should build trust through transparency, inclusive engagement. We should support Indigenous-led climate knowledge and stewardship, integrate sustainability practices with business incentives, train future science communicators, of course, and knowledge translation professionals, and design communication so that it actually affects human decision making. And with that, I wanted to thank you all for being here, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Wow. That's a complete presentation. Wow.
I apologize for going over time. I tried to get through it.
No, it's fine. It's great. Well, maybe I wrote down a few things there, but what you present here, and it's kind of sad. I don't know how scientists feel these days, especially, what's going on, not only in the United States, but, the effects of the position they're taking right now with science. It has impacts everywhere around the world, and you're seeing it a little bit more and more. And I was really surprised when you showed that graph with, the um, declining. I don't know if it's the awareness or whatever of the belief that climate change is caused by humans, and it's
Yeah.
exactly that one. Um, it's crazy because the evidence is stronger, the facts are there, and we're actually seeing things, happening in the world, and people, are believing less, and there's more and more misinformation, and it's awful. But I think also, from what I see, that's my experience in viewing social media material, is that anything, anything to make sure that people don't have to feel guilty or stop the way they live or consume is a good reason, or is a good idea to put it out there, in the open. So I think one of the main arguments for climate change is that, well, it's always been there. It's in a natural, and I see here natural changes in the environment that's climbing. So people are just saying, well, we can't really do anything about it. And also, it's the whole idea. Sometimes when you look into psychology, motivation, and when the task or the objective is too great, that you can't feel that you can make a difference, either you just disengage, and you block your mind and you say, well, listen, let's just live it up. That's how it is. And even if it's true or whatever, what change can I make? And you hear here in Quebec or Canada, people evaluate the population, and they say, well, listen, compared to China or the United States, we're basically nothing. So even if we did like go for net zero emissions, it wouldn't make that much of an impact, which is kind of false there, because
Um, yeah, like to some extent, I understand that the global change, it is a global issue. So yeah, I guess like if it's not just on Canada, but it is still
Mhm.
concerning to see that people think that is just natural causes.
Yeah.
And then again, like usually small changes can build up and create like a snowball effect. And I was actually, while I was preparing for the presentation, I was looking at some data that said China is actually uh, plateauing and kind of producing, um, I guess, or contributing to climate change as much. And they're actually rapidly progressing and creating climate initiatives, uh, which is great to hear. It's like optimistic, but it is really sad that people don't recognize the human causes of climate change.
Hmm. No, and when you think about it, when they point China as the main contributor, but the thing is, China is basically, they're manufacturing the goods for America, basically.
Exactly.
They're America's factory. So, I mean, we're the ones buying their stuff, and we're the ones generating all that pollution, in China. Because I don't think, I mean, the poverty level is pretty low, it's pretty high in China. So, I guess most of the stuff is exported to the United States or Canada. So when people say, for sure, when you think of your own person and the population in Canada, and if you calculate, you might think it's not that much, but for the amount of stuff or crap that we consume compared to other countries, that's where the difference is.
Yes, that
Yeah.
is true. Yeah. We are
Mm,
definitely contributing by supporting, I guess, the industries or the, what is it, over consumerism.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The other idea that came to mind is the whole idea that let's say we're talking about climate change, and you know that I care a lot about that. But it could be
Hmm.
for anything else where you do have a problem and you find solutions. For example, we're talking about green technology, reducing our emissions through technological advancement, but um, on the other end, it's always for the same purpose. It's always for the purpose of the industry and to keep the economy rolling. And sometimes one impression that even an environmentalist would have is that, we're just moving the problem somewhere else. So even if all the cars, all the automobiles were electric powered, then you're displacing the problem and then going through, the degradation of ecosystems for the mining and for the extraction of all the minerals and so on. So you're kind of like shifting the problem of maybe you will solve global warming, but then you're going to be creating another problem elsewhere. So it might be one piece of criticism we could have for science, because yes, science comes with solutions, but is it like a whole solution to the whole
It definitely is
situation?
not foolproof. However, it is progress. And with regards to climate change, I know that the scientist community says that that needs to be kind of rapidly implemented, whereas yes, it might later on cause a different problem that we need to address, but urgency really matters when it comes to these things.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think another like the United Nations where they were talking. So I got this from United Nations, and they were saying that the things that we say to undermine like current progresses or current efforts are kind of delaying our progress. And when it comes to climate change, we do need to feel that sense of urgency. Whereas, yes, there might be other problems, but for example, like, yes, it might impact our economy or GDP or job markets, but climate change is kind of their priority at the moment.
Hmm. Maybe like you're
Yeah.
talking about indigenous practices, which is really interesting because they had this connection with nature and the land, and
Hmm.
something that we've forgotten about. But I think even in their practices, we should even go further and, implement indigenous philosophy, which is,
Yeah.
like the seventh generation philosophy, where you have no impact for 7 generations, and just living as a community and not needing much, being content with the minimals, the bare
Mhm.
necessities, we would say. So yeah, but that's it. If we
Exactly.
lived, if we lived that way, it would be great, I think. But
Yes,
it
I
would be
wanted
much.
to look into something more tangible, but
Yeah.
a lot of the studies that do focus on implementing Indigenous knowledge into climate action do address the fact that their wisdom and their philosophies are and their experiences are really valuable sources as well. So
Mhm.
um, I just needed to present numbers, I felt. So.
Well, no, that's good, but it's kind of like it's really interesting to know, and that this knowledge is coming back, and maybe people are just realizing, we've everything we call progress,
Yeah.
improving some feature of our existence, which sometimes is not always easy. And yes, there are things apart that are part of nature, because nature is cruel when you think about it, but you can't see it as cruel. It's just like part of the whole cycle. If we start breaking that cycle, then we're generating new problems, and down the line we end up where we are right now, where we realize that we're improving our existence
Yeah.
for a while. Like right now, I would say that we're at the best, the prime of our existence in terms of comfort, in terms of well-being. And well, I mean, maybe physically, mentally is something else. But we're risking like total annihilation at some point when you think about climate change and the extinction, mass extinction that's being predicted. I think it's science
Mhm.
that's talking about all these thresholds that these
Exactly.
barriers that we've crossed. I think it's like 6 out of the 7 barriers that we shouldn't go over that we've gone over in terms of
Yeah.
biology and biosphere. So, but why wouldn't
It
people
is
listen?
really also it is also sad. I think personally, like growing up, I've always heard about the science of climate change, and they've now talked about it for decades, but it's only now that we're seeing the impacts that it has on our lives and the extreme weather effects and the warming, kind of like the weather changes. And it, it's sad that we didn't trust the information sooner almost or
Mhm.
implement changes sooner to avoid crossing those barriers that have been spoken about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think another factor is also that everything is so fast paced right now. With technology and information technology,
exactly.
everything is like right there, So,
Yeah.
when I was a kid, when you wanted information or send a message to someone, it was mail. So you'd send the letter and you'd get the letter a week and a half later. That was like a text message in the past. Nowadays, it's like
Hmm.
everything is instantaneous. So when you think of uh, a phenomenon like climate change, which occurs in a very slow but very steady. It's kind of like the Titanic, where the Titanic's there, the glaciers are right there, and I mean it's this huge thing that you can't just turn around like that, And
Hmm.
the planet and the biosphere, everything is basically like the Titanic. So even if we did it now, and that's what scientists are saying, I think, is that, if we make these changes right now, we might avoid the iceberg. And it's
Exactly.
the whole idea of the might, and you talked about that, science is uncertain. So, we might, but there are other factors that may come into play, like we're talking about methane gases and so on, that now they're realizing that it's worse than they thought. So
Hmm.
at some point, people are just like, well, even if we do make the effort, the chances of success are what? We don't know. We don't know. So is it
Yes.
worth doing it? Is it worth the sacrifice? And that's where people are kind of weird there, where they say that they're going to be sacrificing. That means, suffering almost by
Yeah.
not using their car or by not buying so much.
It really
Yeah.
isn't. I think when when you look at it more closely, for example, like the businesses that I talked about, yes, it's extra cost to them and like right now, but even then, like I think there's still benefits of, for example, you walking to work or something like that.
Yeah.
Even small changes, I know that it's so hard for us to imagine changing our daily habits, but realistically, we've gone on generations without having cars, and now we're so reliant on it. And that's not just cars, obviously, there's other things. And
Yeah.
it's really sad for public to kind of have kind of like a pessimistic or a cynical view towards making these changes. The reality of it is, gonna like make a weird analogy is when you buy a lottery ticket, it's also you might win, but a lot of people still go out and buy a lottery ticket
Yeah.
every week without even giving it a second thought.
Yeah, exactly. Or I mean, world leaders who send their country to war on, the possibility of something, and
Mhm.
that's something else when you think about it. But if they did that for for the crisis, the climate crisis, or the chances that we might, get out of it, and that the crisis is probably, 100% for sure to happen. or 99%. We don't know, but it's crazy. But it's all about money when you think about it. So I mean,
Exactly.
would you say politicians and business leaders and so on are basically just being irresponsible?
Yeah, well, I think having, too much distrust in the institutions is not great, but also having like some kind of skepticism
Hmm.
when they have such huge financial gain is inevitable. Like, I mean, the numbers are there and they're like so publicly, outwardly, you know, are against climate action. And I mean, we're in Canada, so like the US doesn't necessarily like, you know, involve me, or I can't really make a difference there. But climate change is a global thing. So when the political system is so kind of corrupt in another country, it impacts all other countries when it comes to a global matter like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're seeing it right now. It's really it's
Yeah.
awful, as an environmentalist, and you see that, there was so much effort, in pain into just gaining a bit to be able to get governments, to implement climate plans and so on. And then all of a sudden, in a matter of 1 year, like everything has just
Yep.
been erased, crossed out. And I mean,
Exactly.
I read in the paper today that Donald Trump actually paid $1 billion to a company so that they wouldn't um, manufacture and install windmills in the United States. And the contract was already there, everything was there, and they paid them $1 billion in just so that they wouldn't put the windmills. And
Wow.
that was energy they needed, especially out in the East Coast. And they're going to instead, go fracking for shale gas and so on. So it's sad. It's crazy when you think about it.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hey,
I've been really I'm like not I don't have like a climate change background, but or environmental background, but I've been very myself like invested in um recent like changes in climate and the evidence that comes from like the science. And I know that we also have another talk coming up with climate change, the topic. So I thought it would be maybe a good connection to the next talk. But we were also talking about AI and how that or open AI is impacting the environment. And one of the English classes that I participated in. And it's insane that there's so much political support when it comes to those advances, but then when it comes to installing some windmills, it's there's actually a lack of support, or they're
yeah.
against it. Yeah.
Those are emotional decisions. Well, I mean, they're using the emotion, for the benefit of oil companies. So just saying that that's stupid and gas is like power and gas. It's true that it's an easy energy. Gas
Mhm.
is crazy, but the impact is also as crazy as the energy itself. So that is
Exactly.
bad. Yeah, and you have all these, and I think that you're talking about the other talk that you saw for the human libraries.
Yes.
That is.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that'll be Brian Dale, a professor at Bishop's, who is going to be talking about agriculture systems, and
Yes.
yeah, local agriculture systems and how to support them and the situation right now. Because when you think about it, when people say that their impact's not that great, but when you get all your food from, yeah, I don't know, South Africa or other places like that, people were
Mhm.
boycotting American products and instead going for South African products, saying that they're doing a good thing. And then they say buy local. Well, I think that kind of worked for a while, but people are still going for other things. Now the whole idea is just boycott America. But can you imagine, all the
Yeah.
transportation and the greenhouse gases that are emitted just for the
Yeah.
food when you think about it? Yeah, because I
I
think like,
definitely look forward to like learning more about that next week. I think we're in a
yeah,
couple of weeks.
I think it's in
Yeah.
April. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you're going to show up. That's great. HTML, I'll stop the recording. So thank you very much, Perry.
Yes.
Jeanette.
Thank you for
Okay.
having me. I hope the information was relevant and helpful.
It is.
Yeah,
It's recorded and then
that's
it'll
all
be
for me.
available. It'll be on the site forever. So